Hey, welcome to Write More Late. My name is Sarah. I'm with the Midwest Writing Center, and this is a web series in which once a week I give you some sort of itty-bitty lesson on something writerly, and once a week I interview someone doing something cool in the arts. At the end of the at the end of the video, I will give you some updates on the Midwest Writing Center and a writing prompt to do in your own time. Today, I'm very excited to introduce to you, if you've been watching this a long time, to introduce to you again, um, Philip Goldfarb Styrt, who is an associate professor and director of English at St. Ambrose University. He last time I had him on the show, we talked about Shakespeare, which is his, as I understand it, like main scholarly background. But he also has some academic experience with fan fiction, which is the star of the show today. So thank you so much for hanging out with me and for having the exact background for the topic I want to talk about.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here again.
So first, thank you. First, I want to. I don't think this is jargon, but I want to clarify, and I'm going to ask you to do it, as layman terms as you can. Tell me what fan fiction is.
Fan fiction can be defined really narrowly or really broadly. And I tend towards a broad definition, so I'm going to give you that first, and then I'll tell you how some people decide to narrow it, right? So, fan fiction is very broadly speaking any work of art. Usually when we say fiction, we mean written art, but there's also fan videos, fan art, art, etc. But fan fiction is written art that is engaging with the reliant on, related to another piece of media, what we call a canon. So you have a canon that you are in some way engaging with. That can be you're filling in some gaps in something that was not explained in the original. It can be that you are correcting or fixing something you think is wrong with the original. It can be that you are extending it or giving a prequel. Almost, inserting yourself into it, almost anything where you are in relation to that other piece of media, and the writing you're doing is sort of reliant on that piece of media for its existence, right? That's the very broad definition of fan fiction. And under that, we can talk about things as long back as, Dante's Inferno is doing that with the Bible and with Virgil, or, arguably the New Testament is doing that with the Old Testament, right? That's why it's such a broad definition, right? But then we have the narrower, more local definition, which is that fan fiction is a very modern invention of people engaging with these sort of media properties, right? So from Sherlock Holmes or Star Trek, which are often cited as sort of the first ones in the modern sense, up through, Harry Potter fan fiction, Marvel Cinematic Universe, things like this, where there's some kind of media property that people are writing about that someone else's intellectual property, someone else, it belongs to someone else, but there are these fans of it who want to write about it. And in that modern sense, it's almost always non-commercial, right? It's almost always something that you can't sell because it's literally someone else's IP, right? And that's the reason why a lot of people go to this narrower definition, is because there are those sort of distinct and specific elements of it, particularly in terms of non-commercial and what we might think of as fanish behavior, right? People who are fans of something writing in a way that, people get really uncomfortable if we try to say, like, Jesus was a fan of the Bible. That language sometimes gets people a little uncomfortable, whereas we're much more comfortable saying, like, yeah, I'm a Star Trek fan, right? So those are sort of the two ends of the definition there. The narrower, modern, very specifically about a particular piece of media that someone else owns, that you're usually writing about for your own pleasure with no commercial benefit, or that broader definition of sort of any engagement with another piece of media where the other piece of media is the focus of your writing.
That was amazing. You were like, here's the answer. You were, it was like it was scripted. That was so good.
It's like I've
Um,
lectured on this before.
yeah. I want to quick talk about canon, because I imagine in the English department, when you talk about canon, you're talking about the uh the library of classic works that people look at when they study a thing. When we talk about canon within um a piece of art or a franchise we're talking about, this is the established thing that officially happened according to the people who decide what is official. Um, and so when writing fan fiction, you're responding to the canon that, well, presumably, I'm assuming you can also just totally not do that, and like fanfic can respond to fanfic, and that's awesome. But presumably we're responding to um the in-universe official thing that happened in the in the world, in the world
Yeah.
of this media.
Yes. Responding to needs to be taken extremely broadly there, right? Just as you said, right? Fanfic can respond to fanfic, but as long as there's that sort of like genealogy back to the canon, right? And certainly when I say respond to, or when you say respond to, we don't mean agree with, right? There's lots and lots of fan fiction out there that is responding to something that someone didn't like or thought went wrong or loved but wants to see a different version of and so is not doing that thing, right? So respond to here meaning not just like, hey, um, yay, canon is always correct, but rather it's imbued with this knowledge of what the canon is, even if it's saying something different or doing something different, or in fact responding to another fan fiction. That it's that key is that relation to canon, the knowledge, that shared fanish knowledge of what the canon is, even if we're going to go throw it in the trash can.
Okay, that's really interesting. I got a little distracted because I was well, I guess I'll just ask if fanish is a term that we're gonna see a lot. If
So
I
fanish is just the adjective form of fan, right? Relating to
right,
fan,
right, right.
right? So yeah,
The
it you
behavior
know
of
it's not that commonly used because often we also just say of fans, which often rolls off the tongue better. But I like the word fanish, so I will use it.
yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that I guess I use it correctly or whatever.
Yeah.
I should maybe say, give a caveat here for folks who are not you. I don't really have any experience with fan fiction. I I am sure that there are exceptions to that, like you brought up De Inferno. Obviously, not obviously. You don't know if I've read that. I have. And I
I
also read the
suspected.
Aeneid. I didn't really read the Bible. Um, uh, and like I'm certainly in some fandoms, but I don't know. I'm not that online. Um, and I don't, for whatever reason, um, I don't find myself that curious to explore outside, which is interesting, and I'm gonna do some like self-interrogation on that. So I'm going to have a lot of naivety and ignorance on the topic. So,
I
dear
mean, I think that
audience
makes for some
members,
of the
bear
best
with us.
conversations, right? If we're actually like not just like putting on a show of trying to ask questions for an audience, but actually like talking about the topic.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you learn if not by learning?
Yeah.
Um, I'm almost certainly going to get way off track with this, but apparently I'm going to ask it right out the gate. Um, you said non-commercial, and I know that there are people who like have written fan fiction and then gotten some sort of lovely deal out of it and become commercial successes with something that they make sure is legally distinct from. But that to me feels so much like in this case, we are doing art for art's sake. And that is really special.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to start with the caveat that I personally am very much a big tent fan fiction person. So I think that if it's done for commercial purposes, it's fan fiction too. But huge swaths of fan fiction are non-commercial, and they really are art for art's sake or art for community's sake, or these non-monetary impetuses, right, for art creation. And I think it is really wonderful that there is so much space for that. One of the risks, of course, is that sometimes, the hosting sites or the owners of the intellectual property can get kind of annoyed by that. And there have been historical examples of big, what we call purges in fandom, where sites that host fan fiction have gone through and deleted fanfic, either because it was considered pornographic. A lot of fan fiction does involve in addition to other things, sexual, congress between the characters, and also in some cases because the people who owned the IP didn't like it. So there's actually one of the larger fan fiction sites, at least in the English-speaking world, is called Archive of Our Own, and it is fan-owned and fan-hosted precisely because it's a response to, I believe, LiveJournal going through and deleting a bunch of blogs and a bunch of blog posts that were fan fiction for those kinds of reasons. And the idea was if there's a nonprofit, the Organization for Transformative Works, that owns the servers, that is, fan run and fan organized, and that basically no one can tell them to get rid of stuff if they don't want to. Hence, Archive and Of Our Own. Not the Certainly not the only place people write fan fiction. People still write it on LiveJournal, but also places like fanfiction.net, Wattpad. There's lots and lots of our online fan fiction archives, and people still do and publish zines and physical copies as well, which is where fan fiction, had its roots before the internet age. They have a great collection over at University of Iowa for any of our, viewers, listeners who are where we are in the Midwest, where the NWC is. Right, that's about an hour west of the Quad Cities. They've got a huge collection of written 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s even, at which point it starts going online more. But fan fiction that you can go and look at. It's in the public university library, and so you can get yourself a reader pass to their archive and go in and look at it, and it's great. So it's
I had
not just
no
online,
idea.
but it is, yeah, it's a wonderful resource. I highly, highly recommend it. They have one of the biggest collections of it in the country, and it's right here in the Midwest. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of reasons why it's non-commercial, some of which are love of the game, and some of which are we don't want to get sued, right? But again, I'm a big fan fiction person. I think if you take your fan fiction and figure out a way to get it published as original fiction, which is the fandom term for that is filing off the serial numbers, so it's not recognizable as fanfic anymore. The very popular Heated Rivalry right now started supposedly its life as uh, a Steve and Bucky fan fiction from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Famously, tw Fifty
Famous
Shades of
hockey
Grey
players.
started as Twilight fan fiction. There's lots of examples of this. I would personally also put cases where people have gotten paid to extend other people's universes
Hmm.
as also fan fiction, right? So,
I feel like you
the
see that a
Wheel of
lot
Time
in.
series was finished by someone other than Brian Jordan
Uh-huh.
because, and I would call that, while it's owned by the IP people and was approved by the Jordan estate and so on, I would still call it fan fiction because it's someone else playing in another author's sandbox, right?
That's funny. The first thing I thought of was Doctor Who, like people who grew up on
Oh,
Doctor Who
yeah,
are now Doctor Who writers.
very much so, yes. And in some cases,
Um,
they were Doctor Who fan fiction writers, and then they became Doctor Who. So, that's a very direct line.
and I'm
Uh,
sure that happens, I mean, in all the places where you've got a
yeah,
80-year-old series.
yeah. I mean, it certainly does in the comics, for instance. You'll have people who,
That's what I
Marvel
was
or
thinking
DC
of.
fans, right? And I know some who've grown up and then become writers for their series. One important thing actually to note about that, though, is that it's considered bad etiquette in fan fiction circles to try to figure out what someone's legal name is, because almost all fan fiction online is posted under anonymous handles. And so, and even when it's sort of considered bad etiquette to cross those streams. So there's not necessarily as much acknowledgement of how many fan fiction writers have gone on to be legitimate, quote unquote, writers for their fandoms, under licensed IP, because we don't know what people's names are. Because again, that whole "don't get them sued" thing rears its head.
I love a respectful community.
Yeah, that's a really great element of the fan fiction community, is that they really are good about that behavior, even when it's an open secret, which in some cases it is.
I really love that because I feel like artists just get a bad reputation for like being cutthroat in general. Um, and I think that's, I don't know, like I'm sure it exists. I don't see it a ton personally.
Yeah.
But the non-commercial aspect certainly must make people, I don't know, nicer.
I mean, humans can still be petty in any situation, and plenty of people in fandom are petty with each other, but certain norms do tend to hold. You can always hope that they do. And I would say it probably is, it does help that with again those very famous exceptions like 50 Shades of Grey, people are not typically getting rich off of this, so there's no incentive to be like, oh, I'm gonna sneakily do this thing with your fanfic, because the whole point was that they wrote the fanfic for enjoyment.
Right. No, that's exactly what I was thinking, where it's like, I mean, personally, I don't think that artists should be in competition. I think we should be in community. But when everyone is starving and there's a limited resource, right? Um, of course, there's some element of that, which is why
Exactly.
it being non-commercial is helpful in my mind. Um, okay, I'll rewind and get back to basics. You did answer this a little bit, but I think that we can get a little more in depth with it. What draws folks to fan fiction, either reading or writing?
Yeah.
Or, but
So
let's do both.
yeah, I think both have slightly different answers, and so it's worth elaborating on both, right? So in terms of my answers to this, of course, I'm going to be at least slightly, solipsistic in that my answer is going to be rooted in my experience, but I have, you know, engaged with others about this question, so it's not going to be purely just this is what got me into it, right? But by and large, right, the urge to read fanfic is usually coming from an urge to have more, right? Whether that's more of the same, which a lot of the scholarship in the field assumes it is more of the same, and there certainly is an urge to see like, I loved this thing, there's not enough of it, give me more of it. Right. You can see that in early Sherlock Holmes fan fiction, which often is basically Arthur Conan Doyle isn't writing fast enough. We want more, so I'm going to write some. And that also you'll see that, for instance, in any series that takes a long time to have more episodes or more books or what have you, will pop up fan fiction. I've written for the Office fan fiction community, and it's not airing anymore, obviously. But if you go back in the archives there, you can see that in the summer hiatus, there's lots of people writing because there's no new episodes, right? So the we want more is a big element. Whether that's continuous more, like there's just not enough of it, or whether it's I want more, but I also want more of this character who's not a main character, so I want to feature them, and I'm going to write a fan fiction about that, or read a fan fiction about that. Um, and then also it comes from the I want other, right? I like the central premise here, but I wish something had gone differently, right? Whether that's I want somebody to have been, saved who died, or I want somebody to have, had a better experience than they did, or conversely, I really want to see this character suffer, and the the original didn't do it enough, or didn't do it in the right way, or what have you. And of course, more in terms of I'd like to see these characters in a relationship who are not, or who are in a relationship, but we don't get to see enough of it, right? So as I mentioned, there's a lot of sex in fanfic. A lot of times that's I wish we saw these characters have sex, and unsurprisingly, on mainstream TV or in contemporary lit, we don't necessarily see a ton of that. So I wrote that. Um, or there's a lot of what's called slash, which is male-male pairing fanfic, or fem slash, which is women-women pairing fanfic. You can tell from those names which of those is considered the larger
I'm
percentage
sorry, I
of the
didn't know that
market.
there was a different name
Yes, yes.
for
Slash refers
lesbians.
specifically to male-male,
I had
and
no
and
idea.
fem slash specifically to female-female.
I knew
Yes,
the word slash. I knew the word
yes,
slash.
yeah. So,
I
so
just
that
assumed
that's
that meant
right.
all gay.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm a little
it
offended.
certainly gets used for all gay, but it also has the narrower meaning. And that, of course, is often a result of lack of representation, right? And it's not just lack of representation of gay and lesbian and other, sexual identities. We also, of course, will see other kinds of, we'll see gender queering, right? Where we might see characters who are female turned male or male turned female or non-binary or other identities. Lots of, transing of characters, that kind of thing. Um, and we'll see, race bending and other kinds of, you know, uh, cripping where, disabled characters. There's lots of that kind of representational work doing as well. And as you can sort of tell from what I'm saying, right? in a lot of ways, the urge to write come and the urge to read are very similar, right? I want to see this. Sometimes that means I have to be the one who composes it, or I don't like how others have composed it and I want to do it better, or I love how someone else did it and that inspired me to do more of it, right? There's a thing called sort of two cakes theory in fandom where, the idea is you might think, oh no, I brought a second cake to this potluck and there already was one, and no, and so everyone's gonna be disappointed I made the same thing. And everyone at the potluck is going, wow, two cakes. How awesome. Right. So the idea that is, again, this might have something to do with the non-commercial element, right? We can have a lot of the same stuff in fanfic, and that's fine, right? You can write a fanfic on the same premise or the same idea as someone else, and you're not stealing their idea. You're just giving us a second cake or a third cake or a 475th cake that's, doing the same stuff. And that urge of writing and that urge of reading are very similar. But there are some distinguishing elements, right? Um, a smaller fandom, you're more likely to need to write to find the thing that you want because there won't be as many other people writing. Conversely, some larger fandoms might have so much fic out there that you get inspired by something that's a fic rather than by the canon, and you end up writing based on what someone else wrote. Like you mentioned earlier, fanfic can respond to fanfic, right? And so there can be a compounding effect of having a large fandom. So it goes both ways there. Both small and large fandoms can generate, that writing energy. For me, I was pulled into writing and reading at the same time, basically because I had a bunch of friends who were doing it, and they were like, "Hey, you should read my stuff." And then I'm like, "Okay, I'm reading your stuff. Now I'll write some stuff." And we actually did some collaborative work. I've been writing fanfic, I realize now, for well over half my life. And I took a big break in the middle, so it's probably fewer than half the years of my life that I've written fanfic in. But I was in high school when I started writing fanfic. And that was because of my friends, right? So a lot of it is that community energy, both for writing and reading, right? Read my thing and also, hey, I know what you think about these characters. I'd love to see you write it, right?
That's the two cakes theory is going to like carry me through my life, I think. That's such a good attitude. It's just such a good attitude.
Yeah, I think it's really great. It's one of those great, like, and there's a comic that goes with it that circulates on like Tumblr and Twitter and stuff like that, that I think is also excellent. But with or without the art, I think it's a really meaningful. It's made a lot of difference to my choices in writing and reading as well.
Well, and it goes along with like I don't really I think it's important that people hear this, but it doesn't really do anything for me. Which is the idea that there's nothing new under the sun. And then that like freezes people up who really are invested in being the first or being original or whatever. Um, but if you look at art as dessert, nobody's going to be mad about more. Just make it right
Yeah.
or make
I
it
mean,
well.
obviously, as someone who works, as you mentioned in the intro, right, on Shakespeare is my other big thing, and none of Shakespeare's plots are original, right? I often run into this like, well, originality is so important, and I'm like, but is it though? Is it, or is it how you did the thing that other people also did, right? Is it what specific choices you made in your particular version of a story or your particular version of a version of the story or of a character or what have you? I really think that's what matters. That creativity comes not from originality, but from doing something distinctive, even in perhaps a completely unoriginal space. Like, this is the 50th version of this particular Star Trek episode in which I decided to make Spock and Kirk kiss. The specific way I made Spock and Kirk kiss is going to, be different than the specific way that someone else did.
Yeah, one of them's a Gorn. Um, sorry, that was a horrifying idea I just had. I love Star Trek, so that's why I was able to come up with a monster for one of them to kiss. Uh,
Uh, oh, there's
um,
lots of that too.
I I don't find look, I wasn't there in the 60s. I don't find them particularly compelling as romantic humans, like individually.
I mean, I think that was just technically racist against Spock, but since he's not a human, but
Yeah. Okay.
um,
Okay. Halvesies aren't
but
people now. No,
well, you didn't say person.
I know. I know. I said human.
I think that's the another big actually premise of I think good, healthy fanfic communities is don't yuck someone else's yum, right? That it's perfectly fine that you feel that way. It's perfectly fine. Frankly, I also don't actually write or particularly read a lot of Spock Kirk fan fiction, but it's a bit it's an origination of the form. It's a really big element, and it's perfectly fine that we don't read it or consume it or even like it necessarily, as long as we're not trying to shut down people who are reading it, right?
Yes.
That's the big premise in fan fiction, right? Is that just like it's okay if I write the same thing as someone else, it's also completely fine if I write something that someone else would absolutely not want to read, and vice versa.
And I think that's just like this coming back again, like the etiquette is just how we should just be as people. But like, yeah, why would you, if it's not harming anyone, why are you getting in the way of this person's art?
Exactly.
Um, ugh, okay.
And it's really
Uh,
hard for someone's fan fiction to actively harm someone else, unless you're one of those really strong IP believers who thinks that anyone playing with someone else's dolls is hurting them. But otherwise, it's pretty
I'm
hard
not even playing
to
with your
hurt
dolls. I
them.
made my own
Yeah.
dolls. So I was really moved by you talked a little bit about I don't have a great word for it, but like adding excess so you said like this doesn't exist, so I have to make it exist with queering and and cripping, and it seems like general representation is much has space here.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to pretend that fandom is a utopia in that regard, right? There's definitely still sexism, racism, any kind of ism you want to believe that human beings do, you know,
I have seen a lot of
and
angry
Spock,
Trek fans.
right? Yeah, it shows up, you know, it shows up, right? But it certainly has historically been a space in which ex representation and experimentation with representation has been certainly more welcome than in, say, traditional publishing, and that certain spaces have been particularly welcoming too, right? Um, there's both that sort of fandom etiquette that you were saying, like, it's kind of how we ought to all act, right? Like, if someone is doing a thing and it's not actively harming us, maybe we should just let them do it. But also in the sense that I think fandom is aware or broadly aware of its roots, which are often in exactly that kind of representational work, right? Specifically, again, with queering, right? Again, depending on the particular genealogy of fan fiction, the particular definition of fan fiction you work with, a lot of fan fiction traces its roots back in a modern sense to those Spock Kirk fics, which are inherently queer, right? But also just that again, that idea of don't yuck someone's yum is really helpful for producing a space in which you can experiment with representation, because even if someone else doesn't see the character the way you do, at least in theory, right? They're just going to say, "Oh, I'm going to click the back button on my browser and not read this piece of fan fiction," rather than I'm going to try to stop you from actually writing it or stop that from existing in our archive, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just in I don't know, like big production of media, representation is just so slow. Um, so I guess the fact of it existing as a space in which one can exist is what makes space for representation, but that's really what I was
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Like
honing in
again,
on.
I'm not trying to say you were saying there is no sexism or racism here, but it is certainly true that there's space for a lot more representation and a
I may
lot
have needed to
faster,
hear
as
it.
you say, right? Someone can just sit down and write it. There really aren't gatekeepers in fan fiction, right? There may be fans who get more circulation, right? Who's writing other people read more of, but the other person, who writes and nobody reads it, their fix still there, right? Someone could find it 5 years from now. Someone could find it 10 years from now. The representation is still present, whether or not it's the most popular thing on the site at a given day.
Excellent. So as someone outside really all of this, the the thing I think of first when I think of fanfic is shipping, wanting a relationship to exist. And I'm I'm guessing that that is not, especially based on what you've said, right? In the writing of it, I want more of this character, I want other, I want I don't like how it ended, right? So presumably not all of fanfic is about romantic and or sexual relationships. Um, can you do you I mean, I guess you've done the research, you might be able to tell me. Can you tell me why this is like at what me as a layman, this is like all I have heard. I was going to say I assume it's
Yeah.
like because it's sensational, but
Well, I mean, it is also a large part of fan fiction is shipping and, right? So, when I say I want more, often that's I want more with a particular ship in it, or I want other is I wish this had been the ship that was, that was the canonical ship, or I wish these characters had gotten together. So, right. I don't want to, again, I don't want to give the impression that Archive of Our Own is the only place where this happens, but they have a really, really good tagging system, which makes it really easy to tell what people are writing about because they actually tell you up front, this is what the fic is doing. And they have two sort of sets of classifications for each story, right? One of which is what are the relationships in it? And the other is what is this doing with the story? Right? And so both of those are coexisting, right? So shipping is a big part of it, but shipping is not the only thing someone's doing. Like if you just say, I want these two characters in a relationship, that doesn't actually give you a story, right? If I want Spock and Kirk together, or I want, Harry and Hermione together instead of Ron and Hermione in Harry Potter, or, you know, Harry and Draco, which is actually a more common ship on it, because again, as I mentioned, queering is really common. Um, that
well, plus enemies
alone,
to lovers.
yeah, exactly. That alone is not a story, right? So shipping is an important part of fandom culture and it's an important part of fan fiction. But to actually write a fan fiction, you need a plot too, or something happening on in the story, whether or not we call it a plot, right? There's whole tags of porn without plot in AO3 where they're having sex. Although I would argue that porn is in fact a plot. But regardless, there's got to be something happening
Thing
with
happens.
those characters, right? So shipping is a big part of fandom, partly because I think it helps organize, right? Sort of how fandom is thinking of these characters, how fandoms think. Fandom is often expressed through character and relationship, right? Whether that's
It
a
occurs
romantic
to me
or
too that
or
romance is
platonic.
compelling.
Yeah. Well, and it's of course shipping doesn't have to be romantic either, right? You can on AO3 they've got slash fic slash if you say like Harry Potter slash Draco Malfoy, that slash means that's a romantic pairing. You can also have Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy using an ampersand. That means it's a platonic pairing and you can of course have both in the same story, right? If people actually both like each other and um, are in a romantic relationship, which should be possible. Uh, but that shipping really, I think becomes significant partly because it's sensational, partly because there is a lot of it in fandom, but also because it's an organizational principle, right? So I'm writing, say, a canon divergence that where the story changes, right? It's different from what happens in canon. But I'm also writing a story in which these two characters' relationship, which might be a canonical relationship, right? I could write, Jim Pam office fan fiction, where that's a canonical relationship, but I still would label it with the relationship. But then I would also label it with what am I doing story wise, right? Is this a canon divergence where we're going off script? Is this a canon compliant fic where we're doing it in a way that is well compliant, right? That fits with canon, right? I need both of those identifiers, right? Is this an alternate universe where they are college professors here at St. Ambrose, or you know, you know, I would label it with both. What am I doing in the story, and what are the important relationships in the story? So that's kind of why shipping, I think, becomes the thing that fanfic gets known for, fanfic gets known for, is because it is often categorized that way, right? And I think it's an easier thing to latch onto than all the various terms for what a story could do, because that has a lot more range than, well, it's these characters. or those characters, right? That shipping discourse lends to. And I guess I should also add, people tend to get more pissy about the shipping as well. There's a lot fewer people who are like, oh my God, you wrote a canon divergence. That's terrible. Than they might be like, oh my God, I do not see those two characters together. Why would you put those characters together?
Yeah, I can see that. Which is a pretty good segue into, and I have my own ideas about this. But I want to know, maybe it's in my head. Uh, I want to know if it feels, particularly on the inside, like there is stigma surrounding fan fiction and why you think that might be.
I mean, there definitely is stigma around fan fiction, right? If you think of it as just a body of literature, right? Way more words of fan fiction have probably been written than any other form of fiction since the invention of the internet. But I don't think you would see that in the study of contemporary literature in an English department, right? I mean,
Oh, this
you
bothers
do
me
see
now.
fan fiction classes, right? But the ratio is not, so there's certainly a
But
stigma in that regard.
it might be like a better way to check the pulse of what's happening in a time period in
Yeah.
the at least literary movements of a time period. Oh
Yeah,
my God,
so
I'm
so
so
actually
excited right now.
a lot of the study of fandom comes from what we call fan studies, which is more sociological and cultural studies than it is literary studies, precisely because they're trying to use it to gauge sort of what the cultural zeitgeist is, right?
Well,
So
but I'm
it
thinking,
does work well for that, and I would say yes, you could do that for artistic movements, but
yeah,
again,
what are
yeah,
the signifiers or the touchstones of whatever it is, whatever this artistic movement of this moment
yeah,
is right now?
yeah,
Like where better to go because that's
yeah,
getting updated
yeah,
daily
yeah.
rather than taking 5 years.
Yeah. So yeah, but there is also a stigma because A, it's queerer and more disabled and more written by women and by people of color and by uh people of non-binary genders or of non-heterosexual sexual identities than most traditional publishing, right? There's fewer white cis men, straight men writing fan fiction, despite the fact that you're interviewing one. So and that does also create a stigma. I think is part of the stigma. It's right.
Well,
It
more
is
white
that
cishet
there's
men have PhDs, you know?
yeah, that's true. Um, right. And so there are stigmas around it. Certainly there I teach a class on fan fiction here, and one of my students, who I'm definitely not going to identify in any other way than that they took my class, expressed that concern on the first day that basically they're all just going to be reading porn, right? That there was not going to be any redeeming literary value.
Is that why you
And
signed up?
fortunately, fortunately, I was able to, I think, convince that student otherwise. Although maybe, in the comments of this video, we're going to get that student out of themselves and be like, nope, I still have that opinion. It was still, a full semester in, and I still, thought that. But regardless, right? There are stigmas not just about the people who write it, but also about the content. It's not considered as prestigious, right? It didn't have to go through the crucible of getting through the modern publishing industry, et cetera. There's no gatekeeping, right? And gatekeeping often is a thing that produces a sense of value. Doesn't mean it produces value, right? But produces a sense of value. So I definitely think there are stigmas around fan fiction. There's stigmas. There've been stigmas about it, right? Back before the internet, it was be characterized, if it was characterized at all. It's often just ignored, right? But as housewives writing things at their dinner table, because actually that was in fact a lot of what was happening, but that doesn't actually mean that it was bad, writing. Um, so yeah, there's historical stigmas, there's race and gender and sexuality stigmas. There certainly are stigmas around fan fiction. I think they are getting better. I think they are getting less, common, and I think more as it becomes sort of more acknowledged, I think, not even more true, but more acknowledged how many people read and write it. It's becoming more, for lack of a better word, reputable. But I think certainly there's a long way to go there.
I also don't well my thinking was about this reputableness, honestly.
Mhm.
producing stigma. Like, well, if it were this, I don't believe what I'm about to say, just
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be
yeah. I
clear.
understand you.
Well, if it were really that good, it would just be canon, which is also like because of that crucible, not a thing. But also I don't have to make art for that reason. Um, but it's interesting, the more reputable bit, I am also, and I'm kind of proud of myself for being offended by that. Um, because it shouldn't have to be, right? Like we should just not have stigmas about the art that folks make. And it can just be however disreputable it's gonna be. I'm
Yeah. I mean, it's
delighted by it.
definitely pop culture, right? It's not high culture, which is not, should not be a distinction of quality, right? It's a distinction of, how it's made, right? It is not, you do not need my PhD or an MFA or a DFA or anything like that to write fan fiction, nor should you, right? It is a popular art form. It is done by the people. One of the greatest pieces of criticism about fan fiction is a book by I'm sure butcher her name because it's Irish and so my pronunciations are going to be off. But Shannon Puch wrote a book called The Democratic Genre in 2005, and it's a very great, it's a great piece of criticism of art, literary criticism about fan fiction. But that democratic element is a really important part of her analysis and a really important part of, I think, fan fiction as a genre, is that it is popular art, right? It's done by people, by the people, demos, right? Just going to pull out some Latin and Greek roots for you here, but it's not high art in the sense that it's not something that requires years of study to do it. Well, I would say I think it rewards study. I think it rewards practice, right? Some of the people I've read their fan fiction for years now, their more recent stuff is probably better than their older stuff, just like you get better at everything by
There have
practicing.
been
But
some
that,
really cool studies on
yeah,
that. Like
yeah,
just making more
yeah,
means at the end of, the same amount of time, you're going to be better than if you're being a perfectionist. I didn't mean to
yeah.
interrupt you. I just got
No, I
excited.
fully agree. And that's what I'm saying is that's true of everything. So it's not that, again, it's not that fanfic is like something that you need a barrier of, you need to have done this stuff to become a fan fiction writer. You just write. And then you keep writing and you hopefully get better at it. And you hopefully enjoy it, right? Because again, as you said about art, right? The point of art is also not to be a better artist, right? The part of art is to express, to enjoy, to participate. And, I find it enjoyable to get better at something, but that is why it's valuable to get better, not because you need to be a certain level of good.
I don't that would have been that's like a really good soundbite. I'm gonna find a way to clip that. Not that it's hard, I'm just haven't worked on that skill.
Speaking of working on skills to get better at them, yes.
Right. Um, I want to do just a real quick divergence because I'm curious personally. So when you talked about The Office, you were talking about like when the show's not airing, I want more content. Um, and that's not like obviously if it exists, there's a fandom of it.
Yeah,
I'm
that could
so
be a
sorry.
good online rule, right? There is a fandom of anything that exists. I'm sure that someone's canonized that rule somewhere. Yeah.
So sorry. Uh, but I just that's not something that I've ever imagined. So I imagine that there's some like episodic offshoots, right? And I imagine there's some shipping that hasn't occurred to me, like Nellie and Dwight. Um, oh, I'm so proud of that one. Uh, I could have done better. I could have done weirder. Um, but can you tell me, because that's so mainstream, where I feel like when we look at uh, for lack of a better term, genre, that's where I think of the fanfic existing, probably just because of Star Trek. Um, but can you tell me a little bit about something so mainstream and its fanfic culture?
Yeah, so there's as you say, fandom of everything, right? I have a friend who wrote her PhD dissertation on Austen fanfic, right? Jane Austen fanfic. As I mentioned, have written and write Office fanfic, right? There are mainstream things get fandom too. However, I will before I answer your question, say you're not wrong to think of, for lack of better term, nerd stuff as the stuff that tends to get the most, right? Marvel Cinematic Universe, well, mainstream is mainstream from, Marvel Comics, which are very, much nerd stuff. And that's one of the bigger fandoms. Harry Potter's a very big fandom. Um, Minecraft has a very big fandom. Right which, again, it's sort of mainstream, but if you actually followed like I guess the mythos of it, it's science fictional, right? There's lots of sci-fi and fantasy and fanfic intersections, right? Again, Star Trek is an originary place. Star Wars also is a very important early originary place. But that said, right, there's fanfic of very, mainstream or traditional or whatever we want to call it, you know, slice of life type stuff as opposed to, more speculative type stuff. Um, and yeah, some of it takes the form of sort of episodic, continuation, right? Here's an episode that could have existed. A lot of it takes the form of what's happening when the cameras aren't on in the office world, right? So the office is set as if it were a documentary or it's a mockumentary form. And so, okay, we saw 20 minutes of their workday. What was the other 8 hours like? And a lot of it is, that the Office had a will they won't they with Jim and Pam for a few seasons before they got them together in season 4. And so the sort of heyday of the fandom was seasons 2, 3, as they're sort of potentially getting together and then not getting together, and then eventually at the end of season 3 getting together, of shipping, right? Of people being like,
This is a
no,
crime against Dwight and
you should
Angela.
do it. There's a lot of Dwight and Angela fic as well. But there's also a lot of Jim Dwight fic, which, again, queering is very big in
Unsurprising.
fandom. Yeah. But you know, if you go to like your big multi-fandom sites like Archive of Our Own, fanfiction.net, etc., there's not as much office fic as there is of, again, more speculative genre fic. Um, uh, there are, sites that specialize in it, right? And there tends to be a very recognizable, for something like The Office, a very recognizable sort of arc of early on there's more. As the thing gets older and loses viewership, it also loses fandom, and then once it's complete and it's on things like Netflix or other streaming services, I guess Office is now on Peacock because NBC owns the IP, right? There's an upsurge because now people are binging it, right? Now people can stream it. And then that goes in waves, right? There's either new content or something, comes out with one of the actors that reminds people, oh, hey, I liked them in The Office. And so they go back to it, right? And there's sort of an afterlife, right, of that kind of thing. Um, and that's I think one of the things that distinguishes in some ways some of that more mainstream stuff from more speculative stuff is that actually often speculative stuff has a very long drip of content, right? They're not stopping making Star Trek or Star Wars content for you. They kind of stopped making Office content for you. Jane Austen's dead. That fandom ain't getting more canonical content, right? Unless we find a trove of papers somewhere or something, right? So, I mean, obviously they do in fact get new content because people do make Austen adaptations all the time. Um, but like because they're not getting sort of the drips and drabs of continuous content, there's sort of more recognizable sort of waves of natural, like just people being like, hey, I felt like writing some of this stuff. Oh, now don't. Right. Whereas in fandoms where there's still active content being dropped consistently, it very often follows the wave of the canon, right? You know, if George R. R. Martin decided to actually come out with his next book, you'd also see a huge increase in Game of Thrones fanfic, right? You know, whenever they come out with a new Marvel film, at least a new Marvel film that like people like, you get an upsurge in writing in that fandom, that kind of thing.
I'm so glad I asked that. That's so cool. I mean, I guess it seems like straightforward, but I hadn't thought of it. Um, and then if you can indulge me, I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Um, when you I can't decide which of these questions to ask first. I'll just ask them both.
Okay.
I'm interested in knowing what it looks like when you work with fanfic academically versus when you're working on or reading. No, if you're working on your own or looking for reading material.
Right. So quite different, right? When I look at fanfic academically, first of all, I'm usually looking for sort of what I might think of as patterns or typical fanfic, right? Um, so I'm thinking of uh, you know, what uh what am I seeing frequently in this fandom, or what am I expecting to see in this fandom because I've seen it in other fandoms I'm not seeing in this fandom, right? What might be quirks here that are related to the canon itself? What might be quirks here that are related to something about the characters or about the setting or about the genre, right? Whereas when I'm looking to consume or looking to write, right, I'm typically looking not so much for patterns as much as I am for what is hooking me, right? I don't really care in a sense. I mean, I'm probably more likely to notice patterns that I like or that are interesting to me, but I don't really care whether they're actually interesting to me when I'm looking at something academically, right? Um, you know, I can notice, oh, hey, again, oh, hey, there's a lot of Jim Dwight fanfic on AO3, and there's a lot of Jim Pam fanfic on this other site, and that's interesting to see how those two sites are different. Whereas if I was looking to read those, I would be like, okay, which of these is more interesting to me? And I'm just going to go read those ones. Whereas I wouldn't be so interested in the one that's not interesting to me. Whereas academically, I'm interested in the phenomenon more than I am in which of these fics is interesting to me. I frankly am a lot less judgmental of people's writing when I'm reading academically, because there I'm looking at it and being like, hey, this fanfic does these things that are interesting to me. Whereas when I'm reading for pleasure, I'll be like, no, I don't enjoy reading this. You changed verb tenses 3 times in a paragraph. It's, bothering me.
Wow,
Which,
just come for me.
well, you know, it depends on the fanfic, right? There's certainly fanfics that I've read and I've been like, retrospectively, that was not well written, but I enjoyed myself. Whereas there's also been ones where I've just bounced off the fic entirely, which again, I would also make myself finish it if I was reading it academically, right? My pleasure is less of the focus. And when I'm writing, right, I won't pretend that I'm not interested in what other people are also interested in. It is more fun, especially when I write longer fics, to get engagement from people than it is to write something, post it, and just hear crickets, right? So, that I won't pretend that I don't care what other people think, but I care a lot less what is the standard in the fandom, or what is usual in the fandom when I'm writing it, because I'm interested in what interested me about the fandom, right?
So, uh, yeah, so that's interesting too, though, not sort of in the grand scheme of fanfic, but in that it seems like just your interest in, I don't know, skill and study is still showing up even when it's just for fun.
I mean, yes, that I am who I am, right? It's an fan fiction, both reading and writing is an expression of the self in some senses, right? So it's definitely going to come through there. You can probably see it in the kind of fan fiction I write, which tends to be quite long form, multi-chapter fics, which are not the majority of fics that people write. Most fan fiction is much, much shorter.
I did not know
Um,
that.
yeah, I mean, some of that is probably simply because shorter fan fiction tends to get posted because it's finished,
Right.
right?
In my mind, it was like everyone, obviously this isn't real. This is just where my assumption was.
Right.
Everyone is writing long form and posting a chapter at a time.
I mean, here's the thing. Because that drives audience and because that tends to
It keeps
drive,
you.
yeah, it tends to just like, a TV show can sort of cliffhanger or otherwise draw your attention. I think a lot of the fanfics that are sort of fan favorites or that are popular, stand out in a fandom tend to be, I won't say super long, but like multi-chapter fics, certainly. Whereas the majority of actual fics written in a fandom tend to be short. Uh,
That makes sense.
yeah. But yeah, I
Um,
tend to write the longer ones, and that's because I'm long-winded.
I I guess so most of what I've seen from you, like I've seen that you wrote a book,
Mhm.
has been poetry and it has been formal poetry, so I would not have guessed
Yeah.
that. Is there anything you really wish I would have asked that you would like to answer? Did I miss anything?
Um, I mean, I think you pretty much covered what I would want to make sure I talked about. The one, I guess, thing that I wanted to mention, I guess, is that right. As I mentioned all the way back at the start, right? I'm a big tent person, right? And so like my personal academic engagement with fan fiction tends to be actually comparing it to early modern drama where my roots are. And I think that there's actually a ton of similarities between the way that most early modern drama isn't telling original stories, but is doing original things with the stories and what fan fiction does as well. So I think that's just one thing that I want to make sure I get out there is that like I, when we're talking about reputation, for instance, I think that some of the things that we think of as very reputationally important in literature, right? These big names to conjure with, like Shakespeare, are functionally doing fanfic. And so there's really that stigma is not just unearned on the sort of abstract, well, of course, all writing is good is writing and you should consume the things that matter to you and all that stuff, but also even if we're using some kind of standard, it's very hard to me to write a standard that says Shakespeare is great literature, but fan fiction can't be.
That's actually exactly I was gonna bounce off that, but you answered it. I was gonna say, are retellings and like sequels or prequels or background takes when it's of a classic, when it's like I can think of two Huckleberry Finn um books that came out in the last 20 years, right? There's My Gym by Nancy Rawls and then of course James by Percival Everett. Um and I think that someone out there would be really offended if I was like, yeah, what did you think of Percival Everett's fanfic book? But like, I feel like it does fall under that umbrella in the ways that I want other.
And again, that's the big tent versus the small tent, right? Um, and I'm very much a big tent person, and I would say, yeah, those are 100% fan fiction. Like, yes, you got them commercially published, and they may be very good fan fiction, right? But so are a lot of unpublished, uncommercially published fan fiction. And they may be doing really interesting things with source material again. So is a lot of unpublished fan fiction, right? Yeah, I would say retelling sequels, prequels, in my view, that is a more controversial statement, not because I think people don't see the similarities, but because there is that other definition of fan fiction that says like the non-commercial aspect is really important. The like disseminated popularly through the internet part might be very important, or via printing it out and sending it to your friends rather than through traditional publishing channels, right? So if that's your lens on fanfic, then no, those aren't fanfic because they are getting disseminated and read differently, right? But that's trying to capture a different element of what the fanfic experience is than I tend to be. And so from my bigger tent view, yeah, you know, you can have really great things that are fanfic. So why would you say, well, because this is a really great book that was published as a book, it can't be fan fiction, right?
As a big fan of the body swap, I am a big fan of any really any Shakespeare retellings.
Yeah.
So that was actually where my head went first.
Yeah. No, and most Shakespeare retellings, well, all Shakespeare tellings, most Shakespeare versions that we get nowadays, I would say, even the ones that are ostensibly straight Shakespeare, are really fanfic in a sense because they're almost always trying to do something with that canon that they think is meaningful and interesting to them now in response to 400 years of fandom, right? Just because the fandom is considered high culture doesn't mean that it's not fandom.
I don't know if you heard my little gasp. Sorry if but I was thinking adaptation as fanfic and my brain
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
something really
And again,
funny.
very big tent, right? Again, there's lots of people who be like, adaptation is a different thing. The transmedia element of this changes it. But of course,
But I
most fan
wonder if
fiction
that's
nowadays
just
is written by people about TV shows and movies, so it's already transmedia in the other direction.
yeah, I was gonna say I wonder if that's just a way to work around the stigma because I don't want to associate with
I mean, I think it's
those
also just a
nerds.
disciplinary boundary, right? Like, I want to draw the boundaries of my discipline so I can talk about the thing I am working on. And the bigger the tent you draw, the harder it is to contain the thing I'm working on.
That
Right.
makes sense and is less offensive.
Yeah.
Okay, I will I think we're at exactly an hour, so I'm gonna feel really good about myself with that. Um, thank you. Thank you so much for hanging out. I will probably have 20 more questions as soon as I stop this video, but um I will hold on to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I found this like wildly insightful and I feel jazzed about art, which is pretty much the best
That's
compliment there
how
is.
we want people to feel in this, right? The whole point
So
of Write More to Light.
yes, thank you. So I will move into just a couple brief updates, things coming up with the Midwest Writing Center as of St. Patrick's Day. We have Writers Studio on the Saturday. Uh, sorry, on Saturday the 21st. It's the first and third Saturday of every month. So we've got the in-person and the online versions. Those are totally free workshop groups for folks looking for feedback on their work. That's 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. Um, for yeah, for anyone who would like to join. We do also ask, that you if you come you're engaging with the group. Then on March 26th, we've got Memory Keepers, which is again a totally free group for folks interested in working on preserving their family stories, their family legacies. That group will meet 1 p.m. at the Butterworth Center and has this month special guest Nina Baker, who's a journalist, who's going to share her expertise on documentation. So that'll be fantastic. And then that same night, Illinois Poet Laureate, so that's March 26th, Mark Turcott will be at the Watts Midtown branch of the Rock Island Public Library. So it's a pretty good, fun opportunity for folks who, would like to engage with a poet laureate. Also, part of poet laureateship is education, so there'll be, some learning in addition to the reading. Then on Saturday, the 28th, we have the Iron Pen Awards ceremony and reading. That's at the Rock Island Public Library downtown branch in the community room at noon. So anyone who participated in the Iron Pen competition on a first come, first served basis, unless they placed in their category, is welcome to read. There will be prizes for the folks who placed, but also anyone who entered into the Iron Pen contest has the option to win free tuition to the Collins Writers Conference. So that'll be chosen at that event as well. I'm going to not venture into April at the moment, but I do want to add that we have applications open for the Young Emerging Writers Internship, the Great River Writers Retreat, and we have extended the deadline for the Foster Stall chapbook series for April 1st. So those are things to look at if you do those things. Okay, cool. Philip and I have now come up with a prompt for you. So set yourself 5-10 minutes on a timer, whatever it is that you can spare. Give yourself this time to write. And as always, whatever comes out is whatever comes out. Let the writing do what it wants to do. But we would like you to think of some art that you really love, presumably something story based. Um, Movie, TV show, book, something that you really love, that you're really invested in, and put yourself into that story. Um, again, I want to thank you, Philip, for hanging out with me today. And as always, please write more light into your life.